Right, well, welcome to our audience here in Church House, a rapidly growing audience, I might add, and our audience online, which I trust does not consist solely of my mother. Welcome to the next session of the Restitch conference, and our session is entitled, Should We Give Communities More Control Over Development? And it's subtitled, Can Street-by-Street Design Codes Support More Connected, Happier Neighbourhoods and More Homes? My name is John Myers of the YIMBY Alliance, and I have the honour to introduce our distinguished panel. I'll do so very briefly and then give you a full introduction before each speaker. To my left, we have John Penrose MP, who represents Western-super-Mare. We have Shreya Nanda, who's an economist at IPPR. We have Riette Oosthuizen of HCA, and we have Mustafa Latif-Aramesh of BDB Pitmans. So I'm just going to ask very quickly, for those of you who've got a hand free and aren't eating, if we could have a quick show of hands just so we can understand where the room sits to begin with. Please do carry on eating, sir. Who here thinks that communities should have more control over development? Could you raise your hand if you do? Good. And who thinks that they should not? I think we're going to get on famously. Excellent. Well, this is going to be an easy session. Excellent. So the running order tells me that I am going to first introduce Mustafa Latif-Aramesh to speak. Mustafa is a legal director. He's a solicitor who specialises in planning, legislative drafting and parliamentary procedure. He was recently appointed as a parliamentary agent, which is a specialist parliamentary lawyer, the youngest in a generation. And his experience includes advising on street-based legislation, advising on the production of local plans and national policy, and acting for the promoters of nationally significant infrastructure projects. Mustafa, please.
Thanks very much, John. So, picking up the mood in the room and the actual question we've been asked, what I wanted to do is look over the current system, how local communities can get involved, and then talk about some of the deficiencies and some of the potential solutions in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill. So, as a starting point, I'm sure you'll all know that the decision for planning applications is decided by a local authority, unless it's appealed or called in which case it's decided by central government. Clearly, local communities are not the decision makers in that part of the process, and their involvement is limited to consultation, and insofar as they do respond to that consultation, local authorities are restricted to having due regard to those comments, rather than having to follow the letter of what they say. Consultation is in some cases problematic because it's at least arguable that in some of those cases they're not representative of the wider local community. Another route through which local communities can get involved in planning policy and planning applications is at a more formative stage of local plan making, which again is slightly deficient in the sense that they rely on making consultation responses. I should mention one exception, which is the subject of a policy exchange paper by Ben Southwood, where the Orthodox Jewish community in North London managed to press upon the local authority the need for supplementary planning documents which enabled that community to build upwards. So it is possible to use the local plan process to that end. Neighbourhood plans aren't used. The problems are threefold, very briefly. First, they have to be compliant with local plans, which may be restrictive. Second, there's an onerous examination process. And thirdly, there's an environmental assessment process that can get triggered. So bearing in mind those deficiencies and those problems with the existing system, what are the things that might be able to help in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill? First is street votes, which I won't spend too long on because Shreya will be commenting on what it means, but essentially if a supermajority of a particular road endorses a plan which has a particular type of development, then the residents of that street can build according to that plan. It's important to make sure that the practical difficulties associated with local plans aren't carried through. Second, the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill also includes a new provision about the status of local plans in national policy. And I think in that vein, it's possible to amend national policy so that it incorporates more levers for local communities. So again, trying to use that North London Haringey experience I mentioned earlier and implement it in policies. And then finally, environmental assessment. The bill substitutes the existing regime for a new environmental outcomes regime, and it will be important to make sure that things like street votes, streamlined design codes are not made subject to those onerous environmental assessment requirements.
Thank you very much indeed, Mustafa. I'm sorry. Now I have the honour to invite John Penrose MP to speak. He's currently chair of the Conservative Policy Forum and the government's anti-corruption champion, and I hope that he will tell us a little about his recent report, Poverty Trapped.
Thank you very much, John, and thank you very much for inviting me here today. Look, the short answer to the question posed by this session is yes, of course, local communities should have more of a say, and I think Mustafa's just ably outlined for us some of the pitfalls which lie in wait from communities that want to get involved. And I am no different from many other MPs. We have all seen local communities go through the pain, the process, the time, the money, the effort of putting together some kind of a local plan, a community plan, a village plan, or whatever it might be, only to have it either ignored or to have it gutted and substantially altered when it comes to take actual effect, or even if they're really, really lucky and the thing gets through largely unscathed, then if it contradicts a developer who's managed to buy a green field on the edge of town or on the edge of a village, and they wheel out a very highly paid silk to get the thing overturned, then at that point, broadly speaking, the developer often wins and the community loses out. And they feel like at the end of all those different pitfalls and bear traps, they feel as though planning and development is something which is done to them rather than with them and for them. And that's the fundamental problem. That's where all the NIMBYism comes from, that's where all the resistance comes from, and it's a fundamental reason, not the only one, but a fundamental reason why for decades and decades and decades we have not built enough in this country, and that's why the costs of housing, both to rent and to buy, have been going up and up and up and steadily becoming harder and harder for generation rent to afford. So clearly the answer is yes, clearly we need to solve some of the problems which Mustafa was outlining the legal underpinnings for, and I hope I've just given a sense of the political reality of as well. Mustafa and John both mentioned that street votes is one of the items in the upcoming legislation which looks like it could be a way of handing back power, of re-empowering local communities to say, we know what the highly paid silks are saying, we know what the councillors in the town hall are saying, we know what the developers want to do, however we live here and we are happy to have development, but it's got to look like this, it's got to be done this way. And if we let them do that, and it's being done with them, by them, for them, rather than to them, then you find that the level of opposition goes down very dramatically and we can get great things done. One thing I would add, John, is that it isn't just street votes which has mechanisms to do this, and I'm happy to go through what those are if anybody hasn't had a chance to take a closer look. But there are other ways of doing the equivalent of street votes and putting it on steroids and doing it at a much bigger, on a much bigger scale for entire neighbourhoods and entire communities, indeed entire towns. My constituency of Weston-super-Mare, the whole centre of town could really do with the investment which a thoroughgoing redevelopment would look like if you do it in a way which matches a local design code, it's congruent with the best of what's already there. If you were making it all look like the best of what's already there, you would have people marching in the streets to say, yes please, we want the investment, we want that to come to our town, and we want the cheaper rents and house prices to buy, which our children need in order to be able to live in the place that they were brought up. So there are other opportunities to take street votes, put it on steroids, take it further. There's an idea in this thing which John mentioned, it's called Poverty Traps, on my website, which is basically taking street votes and grossing it up, turning it into a much more bigger and more muscular version. It's called Build Up, Not Out, and it does the same thing, and it turns communities into sponsors, into people who want development and want investment, rather than people who will resist it at all costs, in tooth and claw, and die in a ditch, or at least lie down in the street in front of the bulldozers in order to prevent it happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, John. And local planning on steroids. You heard it here first at Church House. Writing it up. Thank you very much indeed. And now I'd like to invite Shreya to speak. Shreya is an economist at IPPR. She's worked on a range of policy areas: tax, housing, wealth inequality, and she also worked as an advisor to other organisations: London YIMBY, Tax Justice UK, the Women's Budget Group, and she's a member of the Neon Spokesperson Network. Shreya, please, would you like to tell us about street votes? Does it mean you get to vote on your neighbour's application for an extension? We're all wondering.
Hello, thanks very much for having me. Excited to be here. So yeah, I'll say a bit about what street votes are and how they work, and then a bit about why I think my personal views and why I think people from across the political spectrum should support them. So firstly, no, street votes don't let your neighbours vote on your extension. I'm sure you'll all be surprised to hear. Essentially, I think some people have already kind of said what the idea is, but the idea is that it's a supplement to the existing planning system. It's not a replacement for the current process of applying for planning permission, but it gives you another option on top of the options that already exist for you as a street to come together and agree on a plan, with a design plan and a plan that allows people to perhaps add extra stories on top of their house. And this would be by a large majority, so anywhere there's clear support from the local street. Then if that plan was agreed, then people could use those permissions in their own time, and it's the residents of the street, so the tenants rather than landlords where properties rentally owned, who would be voting on those proposals. So why are these a good idea? So firstly, most importantly, we think that this would help people currently struggling under the high cost of housing. So obviously, as you all know, we have a housing crisis. House prices and rents have grown substantially over the last few decades and are now unaffordable for many people, particularly younger people. And any policy that can help to address this is really needed at the moment, particularly with the current cost of living crisis context. We don't think that street votes are going to, suddenly have a dramatic effect from this, but even small improvements are really needed. And street votes would help to produce more floor space and more homes, enabling the money that people spend on housing to go further and helping to reduce their cost of living. As has already been alluded to, this has been trialled successfully, similar policies have been trialled successfully, including by Haringey's Labour Council, where people in the local community have been allowed to get together and decide that they want to be able to extend houses in their neighbourhood upwards. And this has had good take-up and won support from the broader community. Then there's also the aspect that this would help small builders. So in recent decades, small builders have suffered from a shortage of small sites, with development often being boxed off into large inaccessible sites, and this has tilted the market towards being dominated by larger builders. So this would help to address that and allow small builders to again flourish and become a large part of the market. Helping areas to densify and having development spread more evenly rather than being boxed off into car-dependent development would also help the environment, because as we know, areas of gentle density have lower levels of carbon emissions per head, and public transport, walking and cycling more viable. And finally, the land value uplift generated from the use of new planning permissions would be taxed and could be redistributed to help fund vital services in the local community. So that's why I think that these proposals should have support from people across the political spectrum.
Thank you very much, Shreya. And there you have it. It just goes to show you can't necessarily believe everything you read in the press. Who knew? Responsible for urban planning. She's been leading HCA's planning team since 2007, and she's a strong advocate of community-led development, and I'm hoping she'll tell us a bit about her experience.
Thank you, John, and I'm really, really pleased to be here. It's great to see some momentum gathering on actually getting a legal process in place to facilitate suburban intensification led by people themselves, because I think that's absolutely critical to it all. There are many, many tools in the planning system already to make suburban intensification work. For example, local development orders. It's not really being used because of the fear of the uncertainty that goes with it. Now, one thing in my daily job has to do with placemaking and good design, and that is of course the absolute essential objective that we have to have if we look at how we can give communities more power to actually build themselves. Now, the planning system, unfortunately, as has already been mentioned by Mustafa, is designed to facilitate the voice of objectors, not actually those who support and who want to facilitate change. And it would be good to get a system in place to garner some support, to create momentum, to create opportunity, and to facilitate that. It would mean that communities need technical help. And it would mean that local authorities would have to actually be a lot more supportive of this. There are many, many reasons, as it's just been said, of why should we take away land value inflation and have land that is already available. We can actually deliver housing more affordable. We can look at local need. We can look at multi-generational living. We can look at children who can't afford their own homes and actually facilitate that process. And we can renew a lot of tired suburban or urban fabric that is out there that's not sustainable at the moment. There's a great opportunity through a system of street votes to readdress streets, to make them green spaces, to facilitate trees, to actually increase biodiversity in our urban areas. Now, in our practice, we've had for a long time a thought leadership program called Superbia, and that's really investigating through a system of plot-based design codes how you can intensify certain types of urban fabric. And it's important to understand that there should be certain rules about this. And the more you can actually facilitate this process at scale and uniformity, the better the outcomes would be. So we've worked on two projects, or rather one project in particular, where in Fitzroy Road in Penrose Hill, two groups of 6 houses in a conservation area. We worked with a group of residents who wanted to extend their homes because they wanted to facilitate additional space for their families. The Conservation Area Code said no to any upwards extensions, but actually by careful design, we've illustrated through a mansard roof extension that was built out through a single contract, and that's actually quite important because ad hoc uptake of such opportunities could actually lead to not an outcome that would be desirable in the end if we do want to facilitate great looking streets. So I think the street votes system that's been introduced by the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill is a great opportunity. But I think what we do need to actually look at the development industry is create a new body to help such residents, those who are equity rich but cash poor, to actually facilitate the knowledge that it would require to deliver some of these projects at scale, to provide the design expertise, to actually put these residents in touch with, for example, the construction industry and the MNC industry, that can actually facilitate some of these projects at scale. And there has been examples in the past of pattern book housing. I mean, a lot of our suburban areas have been built like this. We can redo that process, but we need to facilitate that, and it's great that an opportunity like that is existing now.
Thank you, Riette, and thank you very much indeed to all of our panellists for getting through at a blistering pace. We have 5 minutes left for questions. So I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, please, if you have a question. You, sir.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm quite worried. The diagnosis that Mustafa and John offered on neighbourhood planning is very worrying because it's so inaccurate and does not reflect our stories. My company has helped nearly 200 neighbourhood plan projects over the last 10 years, and I don't recognise either of those weaknesses that you have just described at all.
Thank you, sir.
In fact, it's exactly the opposite. So now I know why perhaps it's the Cinderella of the planning system, when in actual fact it's probably the greatest invention of the last 40 years.
Thank you very much, sir. Great. Well, I wonder if perhaps there may be different experiences. Delighted to hear you had an excellent experience with neighbourhood planning. I wonder if there might be different experiences in different areas of neighbourhood planning. John, would you like to address that question?
Well, absolutely. The point about the village plan or whatever it might be is that it's an incredibly attractive idea, and many, many communities have begun it in hope and have invested huge amounts of time and effort. And for many of them, when it works, it is, I think you rightly summarised it, tremendously fulfilling. My point, and I think Mustafa's and others as well, has been that there are a substantial number. My experience is very different from yours, and I think there are a number of MPs who would certainly argue this as well. A substantial number which get derailed for one reason or another. My local plan, for example, was in place and then was picked apart by a legal suit launched by the Bristol University, and the thing has been non-existent for the last 3 years, and as a result, it's been a free-for-all for opportunity development right the way across North Somerset, as one local example. So I'm afraid there are lots and lots where it isn't working properly, although I'm glad to hear that there are some clearly where it does.
Thank you, John. Would any of the other panellists like to comment on that point?
I think the only thing I'd add is I think it goes to Shreya's point that the intention of street votes is not to replace the existing aspects which might work in some areas, but to supplement it for those areas where it might not be working as well as it could be. And the issues I raised, I think, build on neighbourhood plans and local plan making. They're not complete. They don't conflict. They build on them and they make them supplement the existing regime.
Thank you. Riette, did you anything to add?
I think, just to add to all of that, I think this is a tool to make delivery quicker. The experience that we've had in assisting neighbourhood groups with neighbourhood plans is that it takes an awful lot of long time to actually get those plans in place. And once they are, they could work really well. But what street votes will do is facilitate quick delivery of projects, which I think we probably do need a system where both can work together.
Thank you very much, Riette. I would echo those comments in support of neighbourhood planning, and where it works, I think it can work extremely well. So good to hear that. Do we have any other questions or comments? You, sir.
Yeah, so how will street votes avoid the pitfalls that have been seen in neighbourhood plans? Is there a possibility that those pitfalls can just transfer in a different guise on the street votes, or will they be avoided? Is there a different structure to them, which means they'll be avoided?
So the question is, how will street votes avoid the pitfalls of neighbourhood planning? Could you just specify a couple of the pitfalls you're thinking of?
Oh, no, it's in the pitfalls that Mustafa identified at the start. Will they be avoided? Is there something structurally different about street votes, or can they?
Thank you. Okay, so the question is, how will street votes avoid the pitfalls of neighbourhood planning? Is there something specific? Mustafa, would you like to comment?
Yeah, so I think one of the mechanisms is, for example, around environmental assessments. So the bill, as introduced, includes a process for substituting the existing regime, and by ensuring that the level of environmental assessment that's required is appropriately set for a street level rather than neighbourhood level. That's one way of dealing with it. The other aspect is, if you read the detailed Strong Suburbs report put out by Ben Southwood and Samuel Hughes, they set out quite a specific procedure that should be followed, and if that procedure is followed, some of the pitfalls around examinations and the legal challenges that John has mentioned would be reduced.
John, would you like to add to that?
Just to reiterate that last point, which is the point about them is that it's strengthened. I mean, whether or not there is an existing problem with neighbourhood plans or not, I may have to agree to disagree with the gentleman over there. This will strengthen them wherever they're not working properly, just simply by taking away the rights of legal interventions and appeal. If the thing is done following the right process, then the local community is sovereign. And that's what localism was originally supposed to be all about, and it's been eroded and nibbled away, and this restores it in spades.
Thank you very much indeed, John. So I'm terribly sorry, man, we are unfortunately out of time, but I'm going to invite you to thank Onward and Create Streets for brilliantly organising this conference, and most of all to thank the members of our panel, John Penrose, Shreya, Nanda, Riette, Oosthuizen, and Mustafa Latif-Aramesh. Thank you all very much indeed.